Everyone, my name is Seth Collins. I'm the Director of Learning at Terra.do, one of the organizations that has been participating in this Climate Week event. And I'm here to take you through a presentation talking about the climate work landscape and your place in it. And so I'm going to share my screen. I'm seeing a lot of people greeting each other. So we've got someone, Ian is with me. He'll be monitoring the chat a little bit. And so you'll have him for Q&A. He'll be aggregating questions and things like that. I'm going to dive right in. I know we have about an hour and I've got a lot I want to take you through. So I just started sharing my screen. I can see Dora and Sheila. Can y'all give me a thumbs up? Yep, you can see it. Awesome. Thank you so much. So what are we going to talk about today? I'm going to give you some quick introductions on myself first, just so you know who I am. As I said, I'm the Director of Learning Strategy at Terra.do. For those of you who haven't encountered Terra yet, or I'll just give you a brief overview of Terra. We're an online climate work and learning ecosystem. If you are interested in transitioning your career towards working on climate change, where you can find jobs, you can join job fairs, you can join our learning programs, and these are all pathways for you to discover companies, discover roles, find community, connect with others, figure out exactly what your place in it is. I'm going to be giving you a very, very sort of condensed lens as to something that we would spend multiple months kind of expanding upon throughout the journey of our learning programs, especially our flagship learning program, Learning for Action. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the very, very end of this presentation. But just to give you all a bit of a background of myself beyond that, I've spent time in climate for about the past 10 to 12 years. That includes time working in the US Senate, working at the World Bank for a climate finance fund. I studied at the University of Oxford, got my master's degree there. I've been in the climate tech startup space as well, co-founded a company called Metronome in the UK, and now work at Terra, and have been involved with Terra for about a year and a half now. I've been an instructor in our learning programs. I also have helped set up a number of them, run a number of them, and have been involved in just kicking off some of the careers work that we've been doing recently as well in our learning team. I might talk about that a little bit later. But you're going to kind of get a sense of all of that from what I'm going to talk about. Context setting, there's 400 of you here. Absolutely amazing. So cool to see you all of your interests, all of your passions. It's going to be really hard to answer any specific questions that are going to have like a giant relational value to, I think, everyone here. If some of those come up, I'm going to address them. But we've also gotten hundreds of questions from fellows like yourselves, although not exactly your unique selves, for many, many years at this point. And so this is an aggregate of a lot of the information that we've built up to answer those questions. So I'm hoping that if we run with this and y'all are able to just sort of like open up and absorb, you're going to get the most rich experience. And I'm someone who often prefers dialogue, but in this side of large group, I'm hoping this will be really effective for you all. So setting the scene, I'm not going to spend too much time on this.
I knew that it didn't feel right, but I didn't.
Oh, there we go. We got some muted. That happens, no problem. Welcome. So state of the world in a nutshell. I think this is the reason that you all are here. On the top, we've got our global warming stripes showing the average global temperatures from 1970 forward to today. And on the bottom, we see biodiversity loss from the same timeline. Huge challenges that we're working on right now that we face in this generation. And I think the other image that captures like what's going on so well is this graph of historical CO2 emissions and this growth that we've seen since the 1850s and industrialization. Different for different countries, kind of related here, but we've got this need now that we as kind of a global society have in some ways finally aligned to, which is that we need to reverse this curve. And it's wild to look at that and think about that when we've seen the trajectory and that our economies have moved us toward. And in some ways, lots of prosperity and lots of well-being and lots of health for millions and hundreds of millions, if not billions of people through this process. And also, as you saw on the previous slide, some major sort of outcomes that have caused huge challenges as well to that process. And we need to invert this curve over the next 30 to 50 years in order to really help recalibrate our globe. And personally, and I'll just speak from my own heart here, it can be really intense to orient to that and really interesting, because if you think about what we need to do, what needs to happen for that curve to go down, And I would invite everyone to even take a minute to just think about that. It's kind of crazy what we are doing here and what we need to do, and what is going to be created through this process, what we're going to realize, what we're going to learn about each other, how we're going to better relate to energy systems, nature, all kinds of things. There's all sorts of things baked in to this turning of the hump in some ways that we all get the opportunity to contribute to in our lifetimes. That's going to be really special. And that's my own personal opinion and how I feel about it. And I'm hopeful for that, right? You can see this and say, wow, we're in bad shape. But this planet, this home that we have is like absolutely worth fighting for and working for by taking action, whether that's in your career, in your local governments, in other places, through activism. It all kind of comes together for this work that we really need to do. And it's across the board. And, one of the questions that I often hear is, okay, well, where should I work? What's the right place for me to work in? And again, going back, this is everything gets restructured here. And when we think about what that needs to be, this is a graphic from the World Resources Institute that's really saying, looking at what we need to do, what's the exponential change we need to see in these different areas, and how on track are we to do these things? You can see there's very few things that are on, and really nothing where we're on track, where change is occurring at or above a pace that's required to reach our 2030 targets. And so there are there's some things that are off track, a good number of things that are well off track, and unfortunately, even a few things that are still heading in the wrong direction. And all this, though, is also a great map for you all to think about opportunities. Here's all the work that needs to be done. Here are all the sectors that need work, that need attention, that need transformation, that need evolution. And with huge amounts of work, right? You can kind of see these straight things of what's exponential change versus like what needs to have a greater trajectory. There's a lot that needs to be done here. And again, an invitation, I'll go into these in a little bit more detail, and we'll share this presentation if you want to go through these sectors. And again, you can find companies working on all of these solutions within the Terra.do jobs board. You can explore some of these things more in our learning programs, but there's a lot here. So my friend Ben made this presentation for me. He said it's bad. I think it's definitely bad in some ways. It's also a lot of opportunity in other ways. And that's where getting to work really is what we're talking about here, and helping frame for you all, what does working on climate mean? What's a climate job? How do I orient to these things? Some concepts that show up a lot when people talk about this: green skills, green jobs, green economy. What are those things? What are the differences between them? And I would say I'm going to give you some brief overview so you can orient to these, like what does it mean to get a green job or have these green skills or participate in this green economy. Green skills it's kind of an umbrella term for all the technical skills, knowledge, behaviors, capabilities you need to address these opportunities, and touches other things beyond just climate, nature and biodiversity, waste and pollution, circular economy, things like that. Green jobs, I would say, are these like specialist roles that exist in specific domains that are really dedicated towards improving environmental outcomes. That's either for an organization, or let's say an organization is doing the work and the job is within that. And then ultimately this idea of a green economy. And that's what really we are hoping to build with all of this transformation, to say if we do all of this work, it's going to look a little bit different. And that's going to be the green economy. So you might hear these terms kind of thrown around, and I don't want to spend too much time on them because we're going to get deeper into this, and just want to give you some headlines. These things, green jobs, green skills, these are terms that are being thrown about a lot right now and being researched. And that's kind of why I'm anchoring you in them a little bit. We're seeing a lot of demand for these jobs and skills accelerating, which is great. 450 of y'all are here. We're looking for, these jobs are consistently growing. I'm going to show you some data on that. What these shifts are: some of these are people who are specialists needing to just expand their skills. Sometimes this means we're seeing a lot more need for green skills and non-specialist roles, saying you're a marketing professional or a product designer, and what does it mean to actually integrate sustainability into that role? What does a green product program look like? A graduate from the Terra.do Learning for Action program is just standing up a 6-week course on what is being a product manager who is sustainability oriented mean, and how do you embed that in your work at any organization? And that's a great example of that. kind of a transition of workforces from unsustainable sectors to new roles. At Terra, we've run programs to help folks from the oil and gas industry transition into working on sustainability and understand where can their skill set kind of go there. And that's that type of transition. And then what do we call like demand for green skills in new green sectors and organizations? We're seeing new innovations come up all the time, and those are new areas. There's new research happening. And so those are some new jobs being created. And these are the four kind of big shifts that we're seeing across the landscape. Where are these happening? This is some research that Deloitte did. Take this with a grain of salt, because I think some of these sectors that they have, I don't think their research is really awesome, but some of the other ones I think are really clear. Where are these industries happening? Where are these changes happening? Where are these skills being looked for? Environmental services, education, renewable environment, and government work is where we're seeing these green skills show up more and more. Industries where we're seeing professionals with these green skills growing a lot. Internet, for sure. Just technology companies in general have been big leaders on this work. I'm going to skip luxury goods and jewelry and biotech. I think that's actually some data issues on their side, because we haven't really seen that. Investment management, you've probably heard of ESG. That's a big area. And then apparel and fashion is really accelerating. There's lots of recognition within the fashion supply chain. For those of you who may not know this, some ways of slicing up emissions say that about 10% of emissions come from our entire fashion supply chain. And so there's a lot of work to be done there, and that's accelerating really quickly. So just something to keep in mind, right? Because there's these interesting nuances to clothing that are funny, right? Your yoga pants are most likely made of oil. There's something ironic about that. And that whole sector is starting to change. More on the landscape, right? I started talking about different sectors. Here's another way to look at it. Energy sector, 11% of GDP, construction, 11% of GDP, transport, 10%, industrials, 10%, agriculture, 10%, finance, 10%. All these areas are being disrupted by new technologies, a new way of doing things, whether that's renewables, trying to get to zero carbon building materials, electric vehicles and zero carbon fuels, the new industrial scale carbon removal, all these new things in agriculture, from regenerative farming to plant-based proteins and things like that. So this huge ecosystem is all changing, and every single one of these sectors is seeing disruption and transformation in some way, shape, or form. Again, giving you this information as a way to say, whichever one of these areas that you're passionate about, if you have a specific passion, there's work to be done there. And so it is totally possible for you to narrow in whatever your personal interest is into one of these areas, because all of these areas are growing quite a lot. The term that you've probably heard a lot, it's probably been thrown around in Climate Week a bit already, is this concept of climate tech. I've got a definition here from PwC, which is a global consulting firm, but really the idea of applying technology to address climate challenges. Now, holistically, is it only technology solutions? No, but this is where we're seeing the most growth happening right now and the most momentum in climate action. And this is being driven by funding. This is being driven by a lot of new solutions coming out, and the opportunity to use technology to help us better address the issues that we see, whether that's better monitoring of energy usage, whether that's better awareness of what's happening to populations in the ocean and everything in between, tracking sustainable fishing, now using satellites. How can we use that data to better understand what's actually happening in catches and not what folks are saying is happening, right? So huge amounts of different ways that this access to data is allowing us to address and solve climate challenges. An aside, interestingly, this access to data has kind of been the accelerant of climate action in general. Using we as a collective group, I live in the US, in the Western world, and sort of the Western science-based world, the awareness of us as a collective planet needing to take action has really accelerated with the scientific learning that we've developed around greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and this understanding that we are boundaryless, right? While maps at one point, we had boundaries and had unknown areas of the globe and everything. Now we see it as a complete system, and that's really through our science. It is also somewhat through, if you've seen the pale blue dot, some of the astronauts that have gone to the moon, we can conceptualize it in a new way. these are all things that have happened in the past 50 years or so, right? So we're still on an initial wave of doing these things. You heard the song we were playing at the beginning of this session. Other wisdom lineages have known this for a lot longer time. So I just want to name that as well. We're seeing this acceleration happening. Huge amounts of money are going into decarbonization. Bills are coming out to do that. That's all advancing more work and creating more opportunities. You're seeing unfortunately, you're seeing kind of old white men who've made a lot of money saying that we think of the people who are going to be making a lot of money in the future are people who are working on these solutions. And, I think there's a lot of truth in what they're saying, and they've seen this transition. And so there's a lot that you can do here. Just some data here. I'm not going to have you all guess, but just playing around with the number, how much like money is going into these places. There's 26% of all venture capital investment in the past year has gone into climate. We're seeing funds being raised that are climate focused, that are accelerating the amount of capital that we'll see deployed in this space. It's one of the few areas in the US, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we can see security and certainty and a lot of money going into the space for a long time. This idea of unicorns, companies that have billion-dollar valuations, we're seeing huge number of those coming out in the climate space. And at this point, the most recent analysis has found that there's about 45,000 of these climate tech companies globally, and that's a large number. That's a large number of companies, right? 468 folks here. Each of you could find 100 companies that are different from anybody else here and get to this number, right? So there's, again, I'm continuing to try to pace out this growing opportunity space a little bit. More information about how capital is flowing. I don't want to spend too much more time on here. In Europe alone, we've seen 50,000 new jobs in the past year that are all within the climate tech ecosystem. And you can kind of think about this and then think about other areas as well. It's growing fastest in the US, in the UK, and in Europe. Its next fastest is kind of coming in Asia. And then there's some development in Africa that's starting, in Latin America that's starting to emerge. Australia as well, probably in the bucket with Europe too. Thinking about all the skills, again, this demand for green skills, this is some analysis by LinkedIn that's showing the growth in demand for green skills across the board, whether that's in pollution prevention, procurement, finance, research, renewable energy generation, remediation, policy, ecosystem management. So again, you can start looking at this slide and thinking through, well, this is something I'm really interested in. And you're seeing that we're seeing growth in this sector. And so we're seeing growth of opportunities. So again, there's a place for you in this whole space. Lots of people are thinking that these bottlenecks are even just going to get greater and greater. And overall, LinkedIn thinks that the demand for green talent is just going to way outstrip supply within 5 years. So right now, I think there's a little bit of matching that we're all navigating. And I think a lot of y'all who are interested in this are navigating that matching. But this pool of jobs that are being looked for is just only going to expand. And we'll talk into detail like what some of those jobs might look like in a moment. This is Terra's focus, right? How do we help talent get into this green economy? Our goal at Terra is to get 100 million people working on climate solutions. I view all of you as potentially some of those folks. I'm just in deep gratitude to see this many of you sign up and say, hey, I want to raise my hand. I want to orient, or I'm considering orienting my work around this. It's a really special thing to realize at this time on this planet right now. We have tons of folks who come through our learning programs who are new parents and have had this moment of like, wait a second, like, what am I doing for my kids right now? And I want to be able to show that I've really contributed to addressing these challenges. We see retirees who want to get back into the workforce because they realize, hey, wait a second, the work's not done yet. I actually need to, and most of what I've been doing has been oriented in the wrong way. So I want to jump back in and use my skills. We see people early in their careers that say, wow, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to be working on for the next 20, 30 years. And so we've seen all of those journeys. And I've seen all of those journeys as someone who's overseen this, been part of our learning programs and seen many, many folks make these transitions from role A to some role in climate. And I'll give some examples of that in a little bit. I'm not going to spend time on this thesis. I do want to talk about Ben. Ben was one of our first fellows, and this is Ben's like little story about working on climate. and going into the climate tech space in general. And he sort of saw all these industries doing all this work. And then there's this little thing of, okay, how do I get into this niche of saving the planet? I want to find companies that are doing this. And this is how he kind of thought of the landscape when he came into the Terra ecosystem as a fellow in one of our learning programs. And he kind of discovered through that process that there's a much different way of looking at this, where in every one of these big industries, there's a decarbonization pathway happening in which there are climate jobs happening. And on top of that, there's this huge burgeoning area of new areas that are kind of horizontal solutions that go across all of these, whether that's carbon accounting, nature restoration, climate risk, or many others. And he says not to scale here, so don't think of these as that. It's more just illustrative of what's going on. And just this idea that a climate role isn't this separate thing. You know, it can be very integrated, and we're seeing more and more large-scale companies make these commitments to science-based targets, hiring folks in to help them do these things. And so there's a lot of this happening as well. To work on climate, and this is a Terra thesis, it's really important to foundationally understand the science, because it's very easy. There is noise out there. And we've seen a number of folks go into roles that we would consider noise spaces that don't have foundational understandings of how climate science works. If you don't understand the science, you can find yourself working in an area that maybe isn't having much impact at all. And we've seen that happen. I'm not going to name certain areas or certain sectors because there are arguments about maturity and all kinds of things, but it's just, this is a strong belief of ours. So understanding what are the sources of emissions, what are the sinks of emissions? You can kind of think of our climate as like a bathtub is a very base model you can think of, where we're pouring in carbon dioxide and we've got a drain that's taking some of it out. And the atmosphere is our bathtub. You see the drain, you see the tap, and the kind of two main areas you can work on is either, hey, can I help turn down the faucet on some of these areas, or do I need to open the drain a little bit more? And generally what we'll say is it's really about focusing on turning down the faucet, but there's work on both sides of this, and enhancing the quality of land sinks, enhancing the quality of coastal and ocean sinks, protecting nature. You know, those things are super important, as well as addressing these main areas of electricity production, food and agriculture and land use, industry, transportation, buildings. And then there's kind of this 10% that sits in a lot of different areas. When we look at then the solutions, right? So we've framed this around the sectors, and then what are the main solution areas within those? You know, I showed you that big map earlier on. There are kind of the big ones that you can see here around production and efficiency and electricity, waste and diets, ecosystem protection, agricultural practices, addressing refrigerants, using waste more effectively, improving materials and industry, transport, shifting to alternative forms of fuel, electrifying vehicles, enhancing efficiency, and that alternatives also means multimodal transportation. These are all sort of big areas, but then once you understand the science is telling us these are the main areas we really need the most work in. So again, as you're thinking of where you want to work and what to orient to, going into these places are going to be your highest impact areas. Again, they're all impact areas, huge amount of work that needs to be done in all of them. But when you're thinking about scale and how you should orient to them, this is the science-backed research that shows us where we need to put energy and work into. I want to skip this one, but I want to talk a little bit about also understanding the technologies that are coming out. This is a graph from the Silicon Valley Bank's Future of Climate Tech report. They put this out every year. You can see on the sort of top angle expectations, and on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis, these different stages of technology development. You've probably heard of a lot of these, but this is our best understanding and our best insights into when we really think these things are going to really start scaling and what's being done in these areas. So we're seeing a lot of hype right now, for example, around vertical farming or sustainable aviation fuel. All the airlines are really excited that this is going to solve all their challenges. We're probably going to see that crash down as companies fail, as some of these ideas don't work, as the hope and goals that are being spoken to are met with some realities. And this whole curve, again, as you're thinking of where you want to work and what type of work you want to do, important to look at, because you can also see where might there be a lot of hiring right now? Where might there be a little bit of contraction? So hiring maybe around peak expectations, innovation trigger, then maybe less in this sort of disillusionment area, as certain companies have raised a lot of money on big ideas and big visions, and now they're trying to find the right technology and product market fit. And some of those companies aren't going to work out, and some of them are. And so there's maybe some contraction in those spaces. And then you kind of see this acceleration again once you get to the bottom of this curve, as we're starting to understand, well, battery storage, EVs, biotech, agricultural inputs, supply chain and logistics solutions, other things that we really know, okay, this is what we need and what we're doing. The further down this curve you get as well, the less sort of like heavy R&D you're seeing in this, and the more you're seeing more companies enter into that are more around enhancing productivity and efficiency, right? So wind, solar PV, supply chain and logistics, technology advancements are happening, but the new companies that are coming in are much more about how do you optimize these things? How do you make the grid work better? How do you better predict your use of wind and solar? How do you best optimize battery storage? And as we go back along this curve, you're going to see less and less companies that are working on those things because the solution itself hasn't fully matured yet. So again, thinking about solutions areas and that sectors and science thing I just talked about, overlaying with this innovation hype curve framework is just a good way to, again, think about, well, where do I want to place myself? Do I want to work on solutions that are here? We've got the technology. We just need to scale this a lot. We need to support that scaling by doing secondary things. Financing companies to support wind and solar, is another example of that, right? So those are those horizontal ones that Ben was talking about in little graphs, versus, hey, I want to work on something that is cutting edge, and I'm not totally sure it'll work, but I really like the idea and I really want to get involved in it. It's early stage and it's risky, and I think it might have a really high impact if we can demonstrate that this technology works, but this is super early stage. I can think of a fellow that we had, Supriya, who was deciding between two companies that she wanted to work for. One of them was a carbon sequestration through tidal company, looking at how can we use kelp to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and use those for offsets or something else like that, and natural climate solution and sequestration. And then she was also looking at a company that was focused on called Lumen, that was focused on how do we accelerate the distribution of sort of like commercial scale renewable energy projects. So not utility scale, not really big ones, but on top of a large warehouse type size renewable energy projects in emerging markets, right? And saying that's more about this plateau of productivity of how do we accelerate and scale technologies we have, or do I want to get involved in demonstrating that? And each one of you might have your own journey thinking through those things, but just another lens through which you can analyze and think about where you want to place yourself in the work you want to do. Another lens of this, to take a step back, we've been in the technology area. I've been telling you about these tech solutions. There's this other lens that most organizations need work done, and most all of you working at some company that more likely than not needs some decarbonization work to be done, whether that's, hey, we need to get our emissions to zero, scope 1 and scope 2, which is emissions from our power grid that we're drawing or from our operations, or scope 3 in supply chain. Okay, we are sourcing from all these different areas. What are the emissions from the production of those materials, et cetera? And so one of the things to think about is more and more people working on this also means you can stay in your job and also work on climate. It's not just about finding these technologies. Like, that's one pathway, but another pathway is to really analyze where in my organization are these green skills needed, and let me build up my own job. And we've seen a good number of fellows who come through our learning programs who do just this, who say, with this knowledge and this understanding, I want to transform my organization, whether that be The Economist or a venture fund, where we've just seen folks take this understanding and take the skills that they've built, around climate and said, I want to dive into my organization and help change how my organization is doing their work. And so that requires creativity, it requires ideas, because sometimes that's about emissions reduction, sometimes that's about new product lines, right? How can an organization like, say, Pinterest, which is, okay, I'm seeing all these pictures of cool things that I want to change my house or something like that. How can Pinterest transform into a sustainability oriented company? Well, maybe they need someone to create a new product line that shows, well, you want to renovate your bathroom this way. Well, this is the green way to do it, right? And someone in that company needs to have that idea, needs to build up the case internally to do that and build it. And you can measure how many people have done this green thing as opposed to this other way of doing it. And you can say, hey, we've impacted building emissions by this much, right? So there's ways that you can be creative and innovative in any job function, whether that's marketing, finance, sales, product development, et cetera, in your own organizations too. And so I do want to say that doing climate work doesn't fundamentally mean leaving your job. And there's lots of opportunities within organizations as well that you're currently working at. There is a transition for everyone. I mentioned this earlier. I just want to frame this. This is just a list of fellows that have come through our programs from one cohort way back when, who I remembered off the top of my head, who made transitions, and just to understand like what these pivots can look like. TV producers who go to work for climate-focused political candidates, someone who works at a startup programs as a startup programs manager, becoming chief of staff at a climate advocacy organization, a software engineer who is working in one area of Google and then says, hey, wait a second, I want to get involved in their climate-focused projects and transitions to that. A mother's on paternal leave who really reorients her work, leaves the company that she's working on in an operations role, joins a solar company that wants those operations and finance knowledge that she has. Someone who's getting a PhD in climate science to going into a carbon capture space and being a director of research there. A doctor who feels like very, very far away from climate work, but because he is so embedded in the operations of a hospital, he realized that those same skill sets are the ones that you need as a strategy consultant. So he moves into becoming a strategy consultant for a climate tech startup organization. And so there are many, many stories, and these don't even come close, because a lot of these touch the climate tech space. And we have photographers who transition into climate photography and storytelling and becoming videographers. We have folks who, I'm trying to think of someone I just spoke to recently, got people who are trying to build sustainable cemeteries, right, and change the sort of end of life care ecosystem to be more green in a lot of ways. So we see tons of transitions, and I could easily probably call on any one of you and we could do a little workshop of, well, where do you work right now? What skills do you have? And find possible pathways of that transition based on your skill set, your interests, kind of your background. So it's all there, and we've seen all of it come through. So I just want this to be heard as an empowering thing for all of you to think about, because I know that when you're in the job search process, I've been there on my own. It can feel lonely. It can feel confusing. There's 1,000 jobs that don't perfectly fit for any one of them. How do these things match? And that can be challenging for some folks, not all, but for some. Some examples of folks that have come through our programs, some who've upskilled, some who create new companies. So again, we see a lot of things happen, right? And so whether you are innovation minded and you want to create new companies, whether you are wanting to stay in your own organization or make that job transition, we see all of these, and there are all these opportunities for you. And the demand is there. There's tons of need for this work. If you want to learn more about the landscape, this is a very, very, very fast overview of all of that. And so here are some resources. Again, we'll share these slides as a PDF with all of you that you can dive into. But what I've seen be really effective for folks is a couple things. I mean, one is really just starting to saturate themselves with information and understanding so that you can think through on deeper levels what these sectors are and what these opportunities are. A couple podcasts we recommend here, some books that you might find really interesting, some newsletters that you can sign up for. I will be an advocate of our learning program if you want to dive in deeper. We built it out to really support people making these transitions. Folks that come through our learning programs who want to make transitions, about 90% of them succeed in making those transitions within a year, 60% within 6 months. So we see these as really, and lots of nuances there when you start breaking down stage and how quick someone actually wants to go into a job search and things like that. But suffice to say, it works. Like, you will be successful, and this is an ecosystem that wants to help you do these things. So as you have questions about the work that you want to do, or as you're trying to navigate it, reach out to folks, help get answers, talk to people. Most people you'll see in this space want to help you, and the reason why that is because let's go back to that first slide I shared. We need all of you to figure this out. It is in the best interest of the planet, of the stuff, our work, of the solution space and of the industry in general, that more and more talent comes in, more and more innovative talent comes in that either wants to work at these organizations, that wants to transform their organizations, that wants to just learn enough that they can take local action in the way that feels right for them. Like, this is not a silver bullet solution space. This is a garden that requires many, many seeds to germinate. And our hope at Terra is we want to just empower each of you to be a seed that is able to sprout and come out of the ground and raise and blossom and all of those things. A couple side notes that are worth naming. I showed that biodiversity graph at the beginning. There is this kind of new space of nature tech that's growing quite a decent amount. You will hear terms like natural capital, nature-based solutions. We need to find better ways to empower nature to do its best work, which is actually keeping our planetary system stable. And so there's a lot of potential there. We know that this is a big part of it. And so if you're thinking, I want to be aligned with the natural systems, I don't want to just be building more things, because maybe building more things is going to perpetuate the process and the system that we're in. There's other work that we're trying to figure out around nature too. And there are resources down here that you can find for the specific, more like nature tech industry. And lastly, it goes without saying, it's important to talk about justice. One of the biggest worries I have personally about this entire climate solution space is that we solve all these technical problems and we get the GHG number down, but we do that in a way that actually doesn't help the planet ultimately. And I'm not sure if we can do that without this. And so we at Terra have a foundational belief that you can't actually deploy climate solutions at scale without integrating justice into the work as well. And because if you do, you actually end up you get too caught into the system that sort of produced some of the ecosystem crises that we're seeing, planetary crises that we're seeing. This is happening in all kinds of interesting ways. Lithium mining, where are we mining that from? How are we thinking about that? Are there more sustainable ways that we can mine lithium to support the battery industry? You can think about these supply chains for solar all the way down to who's installing them. It's much less likely that solar installers are union jobs. They're not as long-term jobs. So how do we think about these types of things? This is thinking about other things as well, global versus local, intergenerational justice, how we think about the solutions that young climate activists are asking for us to do relative to what feels like the systems that we've been doing, and how do we orient to those things. Thinking about burden and responsibility too. One of the ways that I think about my work is, as someone who lives as a white male who lives in the US, it's really important for, my country has a huge burden of historical emissions. It's super important for us to be doing this work, and to be creating the environment and developing the technologies and solutions that can be deployed to other countries that haven't amassed so much wealth based on from emitting, right? That has gotten us to this point. So how do I be part of that acceleration of that work too? And that's kind of about this responsibility piece of it. So we don't want to create new inequalities and injustices. And just something to plant in your mind as you're thinking about this work too is, how can I, you're going to make this transition. I believe that if you want to, it'll happen. You're going to find yourself in a great role. I just want to plant the seed in your head to think about this as well as you're doing that work. So I'm going to skip over this. There's also tons of organizations that are already implementing this. A couple of them here, I put up here, from crop assurance programs to Block Power, which one of our fellows works at, who looks at how do we work with like low-income housing communities and decarbonize those large low-income housing units and developments. And we need somebody thinking about that and trying to solve that. And so really, really interesting stuff that's happening kind of across the board on this. And so there's specific work that can be done there as well. And you got to speak about diversity, because anyone who's thinking about these sectors wants to work in an area that feels right for them. Right now, the diversity data in climate tech is probably mirroring what the diversity data in tech says, without as much focus on it. And we think this is a big challenge, because we need talent to be utilized, and we don't think that you can have a just transition if you're leaving people behind. And so again, just something to think about as well. Like, we need to bring everyone in to do this work. And so there's really important spaces for folks of all backgrounds. So high level takeaways that I'm trying to give you here is a climate job for everyone. Climate is horizontal in every industry, and it's mainstreaming pretty quickly. And so now is a great time to, you could say, hop on the bandwagon, but just to think about, how can I reorient my skills and capacities to deploy to help accelerate these solutions or identify new solutions in this space. Now, this last little piece of this presentation I want to give you is kind of talk about maybe some things that are rolling around in your heads. Here are what we would say are the barriers that we've seen in some research to people thinking about working on climate. Big ones around thinking of a lack of awareness, big concerns about no prior climate experience, and assumptions around pay cuts tend to stand out the most. And just to speak on the first one, we see this all the time. Folks come in and they think, wow, I just don't know enough about this to speak to it or to get a job here. And it's just not true fundamentally. Is it important to build up an understanding of the foundational science? Absolutely. You don't have to go get a PhD to do that. You can take a Terra program. You can do research on your own. It's out there. You can find it. And ultimately, we just need these skills, especially like non-green specialist roles, so not people with climate science degrees. That need is scaling up massively. And each of these climate tech companies need folks in marketing, business development, operations, project management, strategy, all these things. And within your own organization as well, with being good at storytelling and being able to communicate clearly, understanding how your skills are relevant in any role in any company. So simply to say, if you've had that in your mind, or you're thinking about that, I have a master's degree in climate science, and I don't think I know enough half the time. And so just to orient you toward that, like, again, I showed you it's the whole economy. There's no way you're going to have your brain understand all of those things. And you don't need to be a super deep climate scientist if you really understand the fundamentals. And so knowing the fundamentals, I think, is important, but that deep work, for some folks it's important, and we need scientists working on those things. But for the average person coming into this space, it's just not true. Experience as well. Climate is a young space. Climate experience isn't necessary. We see this all the time, and all the fellows that come through our programs and make these transitions, a lot of them don't have that. Don't disqualify yourself through that process. You can learn what you need to on the job. Again, I talked about that baseline understanding. It's really about communications and understanding, how are the things that I've done, how do those frame what I want? And when we talk to the founders of these companies at Terra, quite often, what they say is most important to them is passion. If you understand the problem they're working on, if you understand why that problem matters, and you can demonstrate why you really believe that is an important thing to work on and why you want to bring your skills to it, that's what they want to see. Not to say I've been working in climate for 10 years, so of course, like, I would want to work at this company. No. They want to see people who understand the thing that they're doing and why they're doing it and why it matters. And that passion is really, really important to them, and that connection to mission. And you see this broader in the tech space, but in climate, it's definitely that. And there's tons of ways that you can kind of build up a resume to be more climate oriented, if that's important to you. taking the Terra learning program is one of those things. Mentoring individuals in the space, volunteering. There's lots of ways you can very quickly just bring a thing from here and a thing from here, and very quickly your resume looks a lot more climate relevant, right? Even if you're getting involved in work within your own organization, and that becomes a line on your resume. And so there's this way you can transform it pretty quickly to show that intention. And especially if you do it all at once, you can show the trajectory of what your interests are as well, if you feel like that's necessary. And finally, can I really make a difference, right? There's 500 people on this call. Y'all are probably from all over the world from what I've seen. Y'all have all kinds of different specialties and backgrounds. I wish I could show some beautiful map of the thousands of fellows that have come through Terra and all the things that they're working on. This is super important work. No single company is going to solve it. No single solution is going to solve it. We need lots of them. We need lots of people working on lots of them. And there's tons of what we call high impact, low hanging fruit to be discovered and work to be done in all different areas. And so simply to say, it's not one big sort of tidal wave that's going to change this. It's just lots and lots of little waves lapping very quickly that are slowly changing our systems. Most industries have never been optimized for CO2. I was just reading about a company recently called Guide Wheel. All they're doing is putting sensors on industrial equipment. And all of a sudden, for the first time, a company like Amazon can actually see the power use that all their suppliers are having. And all of a sudden, just from these little sensors that they're putting on, now they're talking about, okay, here's the huge energy pulling parts of kit that they have in their factories. Let's replace those with energy efficiency ones or low carbon ones. We can see where our highest polluting factories are. What do we need to do to change that? A lot of this is just starting to happen. And so again, that's where that low hanging fruit, high impact stuff exists as well. And as niche as these areas may seem, very quickly you can say, well, what can you do with a sensor that can read something and give you data? Well, that can go everywhere. That goes into precision agriculture. It goes into, well, if I can put that on my refrigerator to tell it to not turn on when power prices are higher, the grid is dirtiest, or my washing machine. There's all kinds of different areas that you can bring these ideas and solutions into different sectors and things too. So again, there's just a lot of opportunity throughout this space. So skills are needed. Whatever you're going to do is going to be impactful. Most of our fellows that have come through our programs and graduated and gone on to working in climate feel really, really good about what they've done. And that's probably one thing I do want to land for a moment, is to say, everyone I talked to who's made this transition is so glad that they did. Some more challenging than others, some longer, more roundabout journeys, some really quick. But a lot of them have spoken to me about how, yes, working on climate is still a job, just like any job. You may have an annoying boss. You may have some people you have to get along with that you don't love, or you need to build deeper relationships with to work effectively with. But being with all these folks who have these aligned missions and changes what everyday work feels like. And we've heard lots of people say that, and say that that's a really valuable thing that they didn't know was going to be experienced, because they heard it the way you're probably hearing me say this, but they didn't really know what that felt like until we talked with them afterwards. And so we hear that a lot. So I just want to name that for you all, that the sort of juice is worth the squeeze in this work and going through this process of transitioning, if that's something that you really want to do. So impactful, you don't need climate experience, and pay is competitive with non-climate jobs, and it's only getting more competitive as we see these companies accelerating more and more. So that's good to keep in mind as well. Some questions for you that I want to leave you with in our last kind of 5 minutes. And again, I'd like to kind of go into Q&A, but I think this is going to be the richest way to think about this. Reflect on what climate issues you want to work on, whether it's mitigation, scaling up things that we need to change what's coming out of the pump or coming out of the tap, or adaptation. How do we, we already have 1.1 to 1.3 degrees Celsius of warming baked in. That's going to cause massive challenges with migration, food systems, other things like that. So there's also work to be done around adaptation. How can we be responsive to these things? And the need for that is going to only grow as we as a society are going to have to get more dynamic and more responsive and a little bit less stuck in what we think is right and wrong, around people movement and around, different supply chains and different food systems, somewhat in the way that maybe some of us are getting used to grocery shelves being a lot more empty than they were before. What skills do you want to use, right? And thinking through those. What sectors do you want to work in? Thinking about salary, culture, training required, whether that's private, public, nonprofit, academia, or sectors that we were talking about earlier. Mapping that out and just starting to think about that a little bit is really, really good to think about what solutions are exciting to you, right? And then where do you want to focus your work? Climate is a global issue, and there's global work that needs to be done. There's also incredibly local work that needs to be done, and on every scale, right? International, national, local. I've worked across each of these, and I think they're all really rich in their own ways. And again, it kind of comes down to, what makes you feel the most alive? What do you most love doing? So just a few more things to think about. Another way to think about this, there's a woman named Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. You may have heard come across purpose mapping and things like that, but thinking through, with all this action that needs to be done, it's really about you, right? Which is funny. You probably came to this talk saying, I want to learn about all the things out there so I can figure out what I want to do. And I'm going to flip this on you now and say, actually, it's really about understanding, that's part of it, but it's actually really about you. What's the right, best fit for you? I've worked in clean tech. I've worked for an energy technology company. I've worked in climate finance. I've worked in climate policy. I've worked with cities around climate initiatives. I've worked with large corporations around decarbonizing certain assets. Just turned out that my action, actually, what brought me the most joy, what work needed to be doing, and what was I good at, fit best in working at Terra. And that was a journey for me to navigate. I didn't sort of throw a spear and hit it right in the middle of the bullseye, right? I kind of had to navigate through these things, and I'm sure many of you have found different parts of these things along the way. But thinking about those things, you're not going to get it right the first time potentially, but it's good to reflect on and think about. And the more that you can reflect on that now, potentially when you're trying to orient to these things and bring in your history and think about those things, the closer you might get in a sooner try. So really encourage you to think about this as well. So that could be, someone who is looking for a software engineering role in an organization focused on electrification. They're interested in electrification. They love creating meaningful products with teams. This is someone who's come through one of our learning programs. They're really good at software engineering and leading teams of engineers. That's what they realized. That's a role that somebody found for themselves. There's a lot to do. How do you do all these things? Maybe some differences to non-climate jobs. The biggest thing I would say in this process is don't go alone. And you'll see that there. You'll learn a lot about the economy. So you got to just bring in a lot of information about understanding what's changing in those podcasts I shared earlier. Connect with people. There's 400 people on this call who are going on similar journeys. Talking with people, that community aspect of this work is super, super important, because community is a big part of addressing climate change, right? Coming closer together with each other. There's all sorts of ways you can identify companies. You can look at the Terra jobs board. Climate Base has a jobs board. Work on Climate has sector areas. Drawdown talks about companies. Pick interesting random things and just dive into those things a little bit and see if that sparks your fancy. What's interesting? How niche is it? How non-niche is it? You can do a lot of homework on these things to say, are these real or not? And you just build this capacity to learn about companies and what they're doing. And then continue to reach out, talking to founders of companies, talking to people who you're connected to who work in these companies. Again, lots of folks are open to talking with people, and we all want to help you. I can speak for everyone who works at Terra. We all want to help you get to the right destination the fastest. So the faster we can all connect to each other to help everybody follow the most direct path to get to the right work, the better, because that's the fastest way that we get the most people working on this challenge. So with the last minute, I don't know if you've heard of this LAMP idea, but list organizations you're interested in, identify people who can advocate for you or connect you to someone internally, kind of identify how motivated you are by these organizations and your interests, and then sort of find the links and track them and really figure out, okay, well, who's actually hiring? By the way, a lot of these companies aren't only hiring for roles that they've posted. Part of that's because you have a lot of early stage organizations that are moving really quickly and discovering their needs and raising funding and things like that. Good to track who secures funding at certain times. Usually hiring comes pretty quickly after that. And you can break them down into who's actively hiring, who's trending, who are you connected to, what ones would you love to work at, and then just trying to navigate your way to find that. Steve Dalton, this comes from the 2-Hour Job Search, great resource to check out as you're thinking through your process. So yeah, learn the landscape, join communities, always apply, get really clear on your goal and your narrative, and really connect to the mission. I mentioned that earlier. And those are sort of some big pieces of advice that I have. You might have seen this thing going around Open Door Climate that's happening on LinkedIn too. Great to connect to people on that. This is Ben, who actually works at Terra now. And so he's been doing those, and a couple of folks on our team have been doing them. And if you see that, again, just an opportunity to talk to people to help us help you. So take advantage of that if you see it. I know we're at time. We'll share this with all of you. A lot more resources that you can connect to here as you're navigating these things. It is my prerogative as someone who works at Terra to promote our own things as well. So I apologize for that, but also I would only do so because I believe in it. We're giving a big discount for anyone who signs up to our Learning for Action program. So you may have heard this already, but if you use I think the term is Climate Week, Ian can put this in the chat just to clarify. We're giving a 30% discount on our learning programs right now. And also we always offer our scholarships and financial assistance, especially from folks from disadvantaged backgrounds, developing country or low-income countries or middle-income countries and things like that. So that's available to you. Okay, I just said a lot. I'm going to pause right there. That was like a giant faucet. I hope that some of y'all were able to take some of that in. I know there's a lot of events happening, so also please go outside, breathe some fresh air, connect with nature. That's part of this work too. I'm happy to stay if folks have questions. You want to raise your hand. I think we're gonna circulate the PowerPoint. Yeah, I'm happy to stay and chat a little bit. I hope some of that was helpful and useful for you. Hope it was a little bit inspiring. It means so much to me to see so many of y'all show up for this stuff and to be interested in it and want to work on it. And so also please pat yourself on the back. Maybe you've recognized this, but not everyone in my friend group and friend ecosystem has had this moment of why am I not working on this? I have friends working on AI and machine learning at Facebook, Meta, whatever it is. And I've just been hey guys, come do this work, please. This is important. You're really skilled, you're really talented. And to see them sort of go at their pace has been really challenging for me ultimately. And so to see so many of you who have had that moment and had said, I really want to orient to this and are using this as an opportunity to dive deeper into it, I really want to celebrate each of you. This is really meaningful and important work for our planet, and something that, I'm just really grateful for all of you to choose to show up for this. So a big thanks to you. Ian, I don't know if you want to add anything or not. And if anyone does have any main questions, I'm seeing all kinds of stuff happening in the chat. I'm finally getting to read it. So yeah, and you can find me on LinkedIn. My email is seth@terra.do. If you have any specific questions, someone you're trying to be connected to, something like that, feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to be of service and to help connect you all and help you again along your path in the way that seems best. And yeah, I'm seeing some people share their LinkedIn's, connect with each other too. Ultimately, the Terra community is way bigger than me, and our ultimate goal is to get us out of the way as much as possible. And so the more y'all can connect with each other, help each other, that's a faster pathway than sometimes I can be. So really glad to be seeing that as well. I don't know if Ian's going to wrap this up, so I'm just going to stay here. If anyone has any questions, you want to raise your hand, I'm happy to answer one or two. I usually think questions can be really fun to talk about, but if you don't, also that's fine, and I'll close the room out in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Stay as long as yeah. So I'll close it off then, but feel free to. It's all you.
Yeah, David, I see your hand went up. Go ahead. You're still on mute. Yeah. Oh, you can't talk? Okay.
Sorry, that should work now.
Yeah. Oh, did you type it somewhere? Is it in the chat? Okay.
No, when I clicked it, it said the host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry. I didn't know that I had that power. So I think you've been unmuted now. So go ahead.
Glad my made up signs communicated something. Yeah, super glad I get to ask this. So I'm a full stack developer focused on kind of UX engineering, front end experiences. The kind of attitude I've had going into climate is that this is just like any other software engineering job. It doesn't matter that what we're building is a climate solution in terms of my responsibilities. I'm just trying to do good engineering. Is that true? Or are there differences to how I should be thinking about doing a good job if I'm at a climate startup or company?
I think that in some ways your orientation, I would give a yes and to that. Yes, and that kind of relates to what we were sharing about how, in some ways these are similar to other job searches. I think the and comes from the importance of understanding, especially the mission of these organizations, and how important. I mean, I'll only say this again. We've spoken to so many founders who have simply said, it is so important to us that the people who come to work in our organizations care about the mission and demonstrate that they care and show that they understand what we're trying to do. Because I think a lot of these companies are really trying to be disruptive in some way, shape, or form. And thus, you're looking for people that can bring that mindset, that's not just showing up and getting something done, but showing up, getting the thing done, doing good work, but also thinking about how to expand and accelerate the work, which maybe that still falls into that category that you're saying of what just being a great, full stack developer is and means. But, and maybe in the software space, it's a little different in the way that I think software is a really interesting place that bifurcates, because there's so much like ways that you can make code run greener and more efficiently and make a tech stack function that way. But I think understanding the work that the organization is doing is a lot more important in some ways in this space. When I think about my friends who work in software, and where part of it is like a lot of the companies they go work for, it's really about building their software skills up and getting to become a better and better engineer. I think that's part of it. But the ones that I see make the transition into climate, a lot of it's around, I really want to figure out how to use software solutions to accelerate the solution that this company is doing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No, of course. Jan, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jean. I am a technical program manager at Snapchat, looking to transition kind of back into climate tech. This is my question. I've worked at a startup that was 30 people, and now since then I am a mother of 2. And a lot of the climate tech companies that I've seen are more kind of like early startup stage. And my main concern is really around like work-life balance. And so I kind of have a very real fear of going back into kind of the startup life that I've lived before. What have you seen in this space? Like, do you feel like it's more like, oh, just look for later stage startups, or what advice might you have?
Find founders who are parents. Seriously. I mean, I've seen a number of folks make this specific decision. One of the reasons why the person that I was talking about, one of the folks I was talking about earlier, chose the solar company to join over the seaweed sequestration company was because she was a new mother. And when she was talking about the opportunities with different founders, it was very clear that one of them understood it and others didn't. And I think that falls into that justice lens of like, if we're trying to do this stuff and create these solutions, it has to be integrated still as well. And integration of multi-generational knowledge and time to be with kids and all these things is a big part of it. So yeah, I've seen that happen a number of times. Terra's co-founders are all parents. And that was like, it shows honestly in how they make decisions at the company. It was a big reason why I joined and chose to work at Terra, was because I felt that they had a lens that was more inclusive in a lot of ways to things like that, because they know the value of being a parent and how it actually leads to you being better at your work in some ways too. So
Thank you. I appreciate it.
yeah. Piram, go ahead.
All right, hello. My name is Piram, and my question would be, what would your advice be for like new grads and interns that are trying to jump into this space, where like most of our peers are trying to like go into like really conventional tech spaces? So yeah.
So a couple things. I mean, one, there's a lot of need in a lot of these organizations. And so being able to, and I don't know if you're a soon to be recent graduate or recent graduate, but building these relationships with these companies at these early stages, they need tons of things as well. Oh, hey, Evan, nice to see you here. Evan, do you want to come up and help me answer some of these questions? The founder of Climate Base, who's got a huge jobs board and does a lot of this work and also runs a fellowship program, is here. And so, yeah, I don't know if Evan wants to help answer some of these too. And if we can unmute him, because he's going to have equally good questions. Evan, do you have a good answer to this one? Let me see. Maybe I can unmute you. No. Okay. Maybe. Hey, Ian, can you unmute Evan Hines? And maybe Evan, you want to just type
I
it?
requested to
hello.
unmute. I don't know if you. Oh, there he is.
Okay.
Hey, can you folks hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So sorry about that. I don't know what was going on my end. Hey, didn't expect to be called up, but this is awesome. Yeah, great talk. So I'm trying to getting mute. Getting a weird echo. There we go. Yeah, Seth, fantastic overview today. This was phenomenal. Is there anything, are there any specific questions I might be able to help answer?
Well, Piram was asking about early graduates, and I know that you've probably seen a lot of these jobs show up. I know we see a lot of them more in the mid-career stages. And any advice for early graduates that y'all would have from what you've seen?
Whew, that's a tough one. Well, I mean, first off, I would always recommend folks take a look at opportunities that are specifically for recent grads. So internships are a great place to look. I believe, I need to double check, but I think you can actually filter by years of experience or experience level on Climate Base. I know that there's a ton of great opportunities on Terra.do's new job board, so definitely recommend folks checking that out as well. I think the most important thing is to build community, build connections with people who are in a place that you would love to envision yourself being in a few years out. And I think the sweet spot for that is typically like 2 or 3 years right ahead of you. So, it's great to make connections with folks who are like 10, 15 years deep in their career. But I would always recommend folks to also proactively find people who are just right ahead of where they're going to be next. Those people just went through sort of that transition that you're now looking to do as you enter the workforce. So finding those folks who can take you under their wing and probably have more bandwidth to do so, I think is really important. Sometimes I think people make the mistake of trying to find the most senior person. And oftentimes those people have the least amount of free time in their schedule to help mentor, a person that they just connected with on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
2 other things I'm just throwing into the chat while Evan was saying that too. There's an organization called In Climate that is specifically focused on helping early stage folks. And so I would recommend checking them out. And the community manager for MCJ named Leon Barron, she specifically is like focused on this work, and they're working on that. So I would definitely want to suggest, like, if you have a specific question, reaching out to her. And I'm going to try to find the In Climate website.
I just popped it in the chat for you.
Okay, perfect.
In Climate.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's a great place to look as well. And thanks, Evan, for adding to that as well. Nishant, go ahead. And then Jin, we'll get to you.
Hi, I just have a question about transitioning careers. If I'm coming from an urban planning, specifically a land use planning background, working a lot with government agencies, specifically in California, and processing development applications kind of adjacent to environmental work and also doing environmental impact analysis. How can I take that government and policy related work and apply it to tech, climate tech specifically?
I mean, probably one of the most direct answers to that is that so many of these organizations, like once an organization hits a certain scale, they have to interact with the government, full stop, right? But I think more specifically, and that insight of what those interactions need to look like is super important. Like I remember when a lot of the like ride sharing companies started hiring for just tons and tons of government relations roles, because all of a sudden they just realized, hey, we need to be able to talk to governments all the time. I think that that's happening probably almost faster in this space, especially, it sounds like you're in the US, and especially with the IRA being passed, that's a lot of government money that's coming through that folks have to navigate. And so that understanding of government systems and processes is super important. When you talking about permitting, especially, the other thing I want to name is that a lot of certain solution areas are very infrastructure oriented, carbon removal, especially. I remember one of our fellows went to work at an organization called Terraformation, and those require some of the same permitting, land use, easement type requirements that maybe you've been working on. And so when you're going through this process, right, like you're a great example. This is a great example of what some of the process we were talking about, where, okay, here's a skill set I have. Now, what are these sectors and what are the companies working in these sectors are looking for these skill sets? Well, what are the ones that are interacting with governments in this way, that they need land or they need environmental use permitting and something like that? And what are those? Those might be large scale carbon removal companies, right, that are trying to build plants. That might be some like other industrial focused ones, like industry might be a great spot for you. Anywhere in the kind of carbon removal space might be a really great spot for you as well. So that's kind of how I would encourage you to start thinking through that process. I don't have too many companies right off the top of my head. And then of course, on the other side of that, there are lots of government agencies working on this space too. So if you want to stay in that space, I'm sure there's plenty of opportunities to integrate those. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Cool. Jin, go ahead.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks so much for this awesome presentation. I'm a UX researcher most recently, and I'm excited to move into the climate space. But I think one of my questions is sort of, forgive me, everyone, for like rambling a little bit, but it's kind of synthesizing a couple of different points that came up in my mind.
Condensed rambles, please, so I can keep
I will do my best. So we talked about like finding like alignment with like our existing skills and careers, and then was also like and also alignment with mission. And I think sometimes it depends, like maybe like, for example, if I align with something that's like super industrial, but then my experience has been in like front end, like app facing design things, like maybe that space isn't necessarily available. What are your thoughts on like one, trying to find that next step in like existing career path kind of thing in the climate space versus just like double pivoting and then finding a new way that like experience might fit into like a mission space that I feel more connected with? Like, what are your thoughts on gauging those two things?
100%. I mean, I'll answer this in a couple ways. If our chief business officer was here, he would say, please don't double pivot. It's just a lot harder. I'll add a nuance to that. That is, double pivots can sometimes happen a lot faster than you might think. And what I mean by that is, I know some folks who have gone to a company with their skill set because they think that's something that they'd be really interested in, or it feels like the right single pivot, but they're also at the same time, all of a sudden they're working in climate and they're still talking to other organizations, and they come on the first one as a contractor or something like that, and then the second one kind of emerges, or they get a little more experience from that, and that opens the door to the next thing, and then all of a sudden they've jumped over to something else, right? And so your first is kind of like a job in climate and a career in climate are kind of two different things, right? And your first job isn't your career. And, I spent 10 years finding my like right combination for me right now, right? Which is the place that I'm in now, right? And looking back at those, I thought in my mind that maybe some of those were the right ones, but those were all learning processes as well for me. And so I would say be kind to yourself, like take the important iterative steps that feel like the right ones for you, that fit your other personal needs, whether that's economic, salary, all these things. Like every one of you has so much you have to consider when you're making a career transition and when you're thinking about a job. And so I would simply say, like, find what is the next most inspiring step for you. And it doesn't have to be the bullseye. And it probably won't be. And as I'm sure maybe you've discovered in your life, and many of the folks on this call, that bullseye also moves over time. And so you're also just going to get it wrong on the scope of your life anyways. But for right now, I encourage the first step, and it always is initiator of action. I think when people try to do a double jump, you need certain conditions to do that. You need more time in general, right? Not for everyone, but in general, it takes a little bit more time to find that fit. Maybe there's more skilling you need to do. Maybe you need to do a couple projects with different organizations, get your resume a bit more like pivoted and oriented towards that. You have to do a bunch of freelance work with those types of organizations. And you can do all of those things. I know a good friend who's come through this program who maybe has shown up in one of these talks. His name is Joshua Sturr, who has that same background, UI UX researcher, wanted to get into climate, wants this other type of role in climate. It's double pivot, but also said, well, I can use these skills to work with these companies. And while I'm using these skills to work with these companies, I can also try to do these other things for them as well. And then he's slowly building up his capabilities to do the other work. Another person who's come through our programs, Staten Hammock, lawyer, wants to be a chief sustainability officer, but couldn't get a chief sustainability officer role with his background, but could get a legal role, and now has been working at legal for a large, the number 2 lawyer at a large company that's been scaling and accelerating. And he's getting more and more experience that is going to put him in a great place to become a chief sustainability officer for an organization, because he's seeing all the things that are happening in this organization. Organization does consulting with a lot of corporates. He's starting to get involved in some of those projects. He's doing internal sustainability work that he's bringing on. And so there's just these ways that you can get somewhere and then start to build on those other parts as you do it too. And sometimes that's not always, there's different paths, but sometimes that's more effective for folks. And so it's worth keeping in mind that you can do that.
Okay. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And I saw that Stanley just asked, will this event end before the next session start? Yeah, we're going to end this one now, so everyone can get a little break if you need it. Get outside, get a little fresh air if you can. Ian, do you have sort of announcements for whoever is left?